Hi everyone, my name is Sameen and I wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining us here today, where we will be covering the VMware Carbon Black Cloud platform. Before we begin, I did want to let everyone know that we'll be having a couple of Q&As during this session, so please feel free to ask any questions on your GoToWebinar panel and we will address them at that time. Finally, before I hand things off to my colleague who will be running through the platform, I wanted to just set up what she will be covering with some information to set the stage. To get a bit of a better idea of what we're trying to solve with our cloud solution, it's important to understand the current state of antivirus and endpoint protection in the space today. Many solutions offer ineffective prevention that is unable to stop modern attacks. Because of this, companies are adding on more and more tools to their security stack, increasing the complexity needed to operate effectively and simultaneously increasing the amount of alerts. This can be a major stressor on teams that are being stretched too thin in order to stay on top of threats in their environment. And this is where VMware Carbon Black solution makes things easier for teams through our cloud platform. VMware Carbon Black's consolidated endpoint protection platform offers everything you need to secure your endpoints using a lightweight single agent. Our singular platform offers a variety of features, including next-gen antivirus, endpoint detection and response, real-time endpoint query and remediation, as well as threat hunting. But it's really what's running behind the scenes of the tools that separates our platforms from others in the endpoint space today. We take a unique approach to endpoint protection by analyzing endpoint behavior and collecting complete unfiltered data. This is different from other endpoint platforms as they can't keep up with evolving threats because of the limited amount of information they are collecting. Whereas with our solution, we're able to stay ahead of emerging zero-day attacks as they evolve over time by analyzing endpoint behavior, something that will be shown in our demonstration. Say, for example, in the event of a fileless attack where a hacker uses a trusted application or authorized protocols to carry out malicious activities, we're able to detect these threats through the collection of all unfiltered information and stop them before they get too far while providing you with alerts to such behavior. What our platform delivers to you and your team today is going to be superior protection, preventing known and new threats as they evolve over time. Actionable insights into your environment, helping real-time investigation and remediation, reducing the time to respond to events in your environment, as well as simplified operations, enabling you to operate faster and more effectively. All of this is allowing you to reduce your cost and complexity by consolidating multiple security solutions into a platform. And you don't just have to take our word for it, as we have over 5,000 customers, including 1/3 of the Fortune 100. We cover companies ranging from some of the largest enterprises in the world down to local mom and pop shops. Our platform is flexible to fit to your needs, so you can be sure that our solutions will help protect you against cyber threats in the space today. And with all that said, I will now hand it over to Catherine, who will run you through our platform.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sameen, and thank you everyone for joining the call. Purpose of kind of this quick high-level demonstration is going to be basically showing how all of the concepts that Sameen was just talking about actually translate to the tool itself, right? What is it like to live with? What do these concepts mean for your day-to-day and your roles and your teams? And then, as she mentioned, have some Q&As throughout. But generally, the way that I like to structure this is just talk about some very high-level architecture of the solution, so you guys have an understanding of, how this will work for you in the environment. But then, really get into those three pillars of prevention, visibility, and control that's essentially going to set aside us from really any other next-gen AV today in this space. So, before we do that, I always want to open up the floor to just understanding a bit more. I get it's a broader one-to-many demonstration, but if we can make this as customized as possible and understand maybe some of the pain points that people on the call have been going through or wish list items that they would like to see, I can try to make this demonstration as targeted as possible. So, Sameen, I don't know if while you were talking anything has come through. We're kind of opening that up. Like I said, please feel free to add those things to the chat, and we can give a minute or so to have those come through.
For sure. We've had a couple of things come through. So one was one of the biggest pain points that we've kind of run into is that there's a lot of time spent, whether it's mitigating false positives on updates or even trying to figure out what's going on with security. And this is coming from someone who's on a small team, and so they're spread pretty thin.
Okay, small team. Perfect. I think, ease of use and automation tends to be a really big theme regardless of, who we talk to, just because, what we're seeing is that security kind of is a lot of the times a role and responsibility that gets thrown into the rest of the million hats that you guys are probably wearing today. So I'll definitely try to stress things from that point of view as, well as the fact that understanding, this was targeted towards a lot of retail, but taking it back beyond that, since it is that holiday season, means there's probably about 4 more fires that we'll have to put out before we get a little bit of a break, and then things reset in the new year. So want to make sure that there's nothing else that came through to Samin that I'll focus on.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one thing that you kind of pointed out is it is retail season, and it's the holiday season, so no one really wants to be dealing with their things, and so it seems like there's also just a need for constant updates to make sure that signature prevention is up to date and it doesn't reach endpoints if they are off the network or offline. And then more than that, it's also just that there's a lot that seems to be unknown, basic information on the endpoints and where they have that drift.
Okay, perfect. So, I mean, kind of to tackle the first bit up front, when we talk about updates, that's definitely something that's a bit more traditional AV centered. And I'll be sure to highlight how we're getting away from that with this platform and trying to automate a lot of that for you guys as well. And then, obviously the whole, I would say, aspect of, visibility, the unknown. There's going to be a lot less assuming, right, that we've had to do previously with this platform. So if there's nothing else, I think that's a pretty solid kind of starting point to customize this. But again, for everyone on the call, please feel free to, keep posting things in the chat as we go through this the next 20 minutes or so that the time at the end left for questions, we can, make the most of.
Perfect.
Awesome. So, starting from the architectural side, as we mentioned, cloud hosted solutions. So really that comes down to nothing to stand up or maintain in-house for you guys, which is always nice to hear, right? But also you'll have those advantages as far as remote control, remote visibility goes, that tends to be really big, especially with this remote workforce that we're all dealing with. Right. I know from at least the VMware engineering side, we're work from home until, I think it's September 2021, it seems today. So no one's coming to my house and, getting in front of my endpoint if they need to look at something. So, we'll talk about a lot of those advantages in the console here too. But then, in regard to what's actually in the environment, we're going to deploy out that lightweight agent to the kernel level of each of your machines. So I don't want to get into the weeds here, but it is a pretty big advantage apart from traditionally VNAV sitting in the kernel, because we're not just going to have visibility into files, right? They come in and out, but really applications on those endpoints, in memory attacks, the network, email, right, internet. And so having that prevention from basically every avenue that endpoint touches. And then moving forward, how that lightweight agent is just going to perform day in and day out is continuously recording this process-centric activity and heart beating that to our backend every 3 minutes or so. So this will do a few pretty big things for you guys, and already some taking care of those pain points that you'd mentioned at the beginning. But first being, right, since we don't do those big point in time scans or, resource intensive scans that traditional AV tends to do, we're able to stay incredibly lightweight on those devices. So we'll always sit at less than 1% CPU. It's never going to sound like a jet engine taking off in the office, right? When we're doing those scans, but also that means that basically any changes that you guys are making in the console, whether it's whitelisting, blacklisting, right, they're going to reflect on those devices in real time. So there's no business delays or, again, the need for manual updates from an organizational standpoint as well as a prevention standpoint, right? So those signature updates that you need to do constantly with traditional AV to feel like you even have somewhat proper prevention goes out the window. All of that's done automatically, as well as the other layers that we have in place that I'll talk about in a moment. And then finally, in the reverse, all that activity on your devices is going to populate here in the console in real time. So you don't feel like when you get an alert, hey, this is what I'm seeing, but it really happened 4 hours ago on the device or whatever the case may be. So moving forward, right past that architecture, I'm going to spend the rest of the time in the actual console itself, walking you through that prevention, visibility, and control, right, and some of the other aspects that we've talked about throughout here. But off the bat, hopefully something that folks have noticed as the screen is up is that we try to keep it very clean, right? The UI very intuitive, very easy to use, where every single one of the bars, the terms, the icons that you would want to click into are things that we can interact with, and we're brought directly to the data associated with that. So I like to say you can get to where you want to go or do what you need to do within one click, which for me was a big feature because I always felt like I needed a PhD in the solution that I was using previously, and that learning curve is not something that a lot of us have the time for. And then before we get off this screen, I do just want to draw the attention to the attack stop bucket in the top left, because this for me is basically that direct visualization of the multi-layered prevention model that Samin and I keep talking about. So not only is it that first really big differentiator, but I really think that the prevention tends to be the aspect that's going to give you guys as a team the biggest sense of peace, right, or peace of mind. Hey, this is what Carbon Black is looking at and preventing that other tools won't. So starting at the bottom with any malware or potentially unwanted programs, these are going to be taken care of with Carbon Black's base layer of prevention, which is that signature-based detection, right? So a direct replacement for basically any traditional AV, doing that signature-based detection, anything that you like or you're used to, right? We'll still take care of. We're not going to be ignoring with this first layer of prevention here. However, we also know with the threat landscape, it's necessary to go above and beyond that known bad, which brings us to any of that potential malware or that malware variants that we're seeing where it's still file-based attacks, but there are things that are unknown, right? And the hashes aren't sitting on those blacklists that attackers will go ahead and abuse, or go back and look to say, hey, is this already known bad or not? It's the commodity malware, the zero-day malware, where they're basically churning out new hashes by the second to try to get around this traditional AV that a lot of us still have in place. So we'll be able to protect you against these types of attacks with that second layer of prevention in place, and that's going to be, really that machine learning heuristics piece. And machine learning tends to be very buzzwordy as is. So what it's really saying for us is that we're doing a static analysis of every single file, regardless of where it comes from, to be able to say, okay, is this going to try to behave like malware we've seen? If so, go ahead and apply that prevention. Now, VMware Carbon Black doesn't stop there, and it brings us to that third layer of prevention on top that's taking care of the most advanced threats that we're seeing, which are those non-malware or file-less attacks, right? And clicking into this, these are now the instances where there's nothing to point back to in the file system to say, okay, hey, this is what's bad, or this is what the attackers should actually leverage or abuse, but it's now the trusted applications, right? The trusted processes, things like our Microsoft Words, our Adobe Readers, PowerShells, right? All the things that are signed, verified, known good, and because of that tend to have a blind eye turned to them from a security perspective. So knowing that these things are now starting to be abused, what Carbon Black is actually going to do for you is look out for the behaviors in the environment, or something known as those attacks TTPs, right? Really those tactics, techniques, and procedures. So what we're doing in this third layer on top of signature-based machine learning is now that behavioral analytics piece, or the event streaming analytics that Carbon Black has actually coined in the security space. And the reason this is the single biggest differentiator is because we're not just looking at behaviors when we think something bad is happening like other next-gen AV, right? But Carbon Black is trying to take a much more proactive approach to security, where we're looking at everything in real time, regardless of suspicion. Right, so that means every process, application, inbound, outbound, network connection, execution, behavior, so that way we don't miss those layers to attacks that some vendors miss because it doesn't look, quote unquote, bad to them, so to say. But again, looking at everything holistically and then applying that prevention. And what that'll yield is not only, like I said, that more targeted prevention, but also the full visibility that I'll show you in a moment. as well as a big byproduct being the automation of the tool, right? And that's not just kind of coming from my opinion, but we've actually tested by the MITRE ATT&CK framework earlier this year as the solution that requires least amount of human intervention in the console while still giving you that best detection and prevention, right? So like I said, a huge aspect, I think, for a lot of those teams where we can't just be in this tool 24/7, but we also don't want to assume, right, that a tool is only looking at files or stopping things that we need it to stop. So moving forward, we can kind of continue with the workflow here after understanding the layers of prevention and dig into one of those big byproducts, which is that full visibility. And so for any one of these alerts, I can click into this alert triage button here. And what we're brought to now is the entire life cycle of an attack, right? Beginning to end, truly starting with that end user. What did they actually click on, right? What was invoked? Where did Carbon Black have to step in and apply that prevention? But also, why, right? What are things we're seeing as far as the command goes on the right-hand side here, the hashes, the behaviors. So now, right, most important feeling, and I think an improvement here being that feeling of we don't know what we don't know goes away for teams, right? I think for a lot of us today, we're getting an alert. It says, hey, we stopped XYZ. There might be a little bit of context there if we're using a more advanced AV, but really have no insight into what else was going on the device at that time, right? What were they trying to do? And I think that assuming, right, is the piece that comes in that tends to make us a bit uneasy, right? Having to think that, okay, it just stopped everything. As well as, like I said, where are these things coming from? What are our end users clicking on? And, those are probably things that you guys are asking and getting asked. So we're all a bit too familiar with the manual investigations or, digging through logs or, trying to talk to those end users and see if they remember what they clicked on. Process that genuinely took me hours to days, depending on the severity of a situation, right? So now not only knowing that from a prevention standpoint, Carbon Black is applying prevention for those advanced attacks automatically, right? Even when something like a trusted PowerShell is being abused for ransomware, but that we're also giving you the visibility to be able to answer any of those questions within, seconds. So this is a piece, like I said, that I think really tends to clean up the workflow for a lot of team, take the headache away around investigations, the time associated, and best part being, in my opinion, that we don't have to look at this, but it's there for us, right? It's something that I like to have, but I don't want to need to be in this console 24/7. And so kind of a good balance there, right? Teams that like a flow or even sending a screenshot of this right up the chain. So that way, if they're curious where things came from, now those are reports that we're no longer having to put together and, string together ourselves. And as well as for teams that enjoy a bit more of a verbose view, having that timestamp application and step-by-step event here of what actually happened, and the information associated available, I think is really powerful. So from a visibility perspective, right, last thing that I do want to show just for some quick context is, I keep boasting that we are the provider that has that unfiltered visibility 24/7, not just surrounding an alert. So I do want to show you guys where that lives in the console, and that'll be under the investigate page on the left-hand side here, right? And this is where teams will have access to all those events, not just those associated with an alert, right? The applications, device, and network connections here, so that, from a not just security perspective, but even kind of bridging that gap now to an IT perspective, we don't feel like we have that missing visibility, right? When I was back in the day in my help desk position, would have been really nice to, be able to quickly come in here and query for what an application or a user was doing between a certain timestamp to figure things out. And so, like I said, not something I necessarily show every time, but I think depending on how granular teams want to get, either way, it's just good to have the context of, we really are looking at events and things deeper and more holistically than those other providers. So now that we've talked about that prevention, right, we walked through the visibility and also that unfiltered streaming analytics provides, I want to continue that workflow into the last control bucket that with this one product, the next Gen AV EDR, kind of as a really strong starting place with Carbon Black security, you guys will also now have control within the environment. So right here from this alert view, there are a few things that I like kind of from a house cleaning perspective, if you will, that we can execute on. right? First being, since every single one of these tiles are things we can, interact with and then take action on, up front, for instance, this Excel document that actually had the macro invoking PowerShell in the first place, we can go ahead and add this to a white or black list really right from here, as well as delete this application, not just from this device, but any device that it's seen on across our entire organization, right? So kind of taking away that fishing work of, even if it hasn't executed, this is something that we can go ahead and take care of for you. Then right above that take action button, you guys will see this quarantine asset button. And this basically gives you the power to cut off all TCP and UDP connections from this device, except for the connection into the Carbon Black cloud. So if you got a notification you wanted to dive into a bit deeper, or really any reason, right, not just security related, you guys wanted to take off a device or mitigate that east-west traffic, you can go ahead and do so with the click of a button. Right. And so the piece that I really like about this too is kind of giving the power back into our team's hands, right? Where even maybe, I don't want it to have to be a fire every time I get an alert or see something suspicious in the environment. I want to be able to just quarantine that asset and kind of take things into my own hands at my own pace. And then finally, along the lines of, that immediate control, I always like to show this live response feature that we've built into every package here at Carbon Black. And it's essentially a full-blown command line shell that we've created, so that way teams can actually take any sort of action on those devices that they would want to without having to get in front of them. Right. So I think this is really the way that Carbon Black is trying to get rid of that security compromise that a lot of us have had to deal with as well, where, maybe we want to RDP into a machine, but then it has to stay online for us to be able to use those tools. And then, we're dealing with the worry of spread or other things going wrong. Whereas, vice versa, if we want to take a device off the network, then we completely go dark from a visibility or control perspective. And, we're having users ship us those devices, and it's a whole process that can really take days. So now hopefully never having to deal with, that security compromise from that perspective. But finally, kind of into that bucket of control, I do want to talk about, the long-term control within this tool too. And when I say long-term, I really mean basically ways that you can use this tool to put yourself in a better security posture moving forward, right? And so really what this is going to come down to is the policies with Carbon Black. Right. And so policies with Carbon Black are essentially our way of saying, all of your environments are going to run completely differently. Right. No two school systems are even going to have the same environment. No two retailers are going to have the same environment, startups, IBMs, right, and so forth. And so the one size fits all kind of culture of security is really not appropriate anymore. And so the policies are ways that we're not just going to have the ability to say, hey, blacklist and whitelist things across the entire environment, which you still have the ability to do with reputations right underneath policies here on the left-hand side. But really the policies are getting down to the granular bits of saying, I want this to behave like this. And so you'll see monitored, standard, and advanced in the light gray up here are the pre-built out-of-the-box policies for really day one value, right? Where teams can basically leverage out of the box. It's for ease of use. Standard is that meant to be, best of breed policy that we've created that'll have those 3 layers of prevention in place that we keep talking about, right? It'll stop the attacks like that advanced PowerShell ransomware we looked at briefly. So very comprehensive as is. But what you'll see when I click into a policy here is that, how the agent actually performs is no longer a black box, right? Where we don't really know how it's making its decisions or why it's doing what it's doing. But in black and white, we can see the exact process that Carbon Black looks out for, the associated operation attempt, and then how we respond. Right. And with this transparency, guys, it basically gives teams now the ability to customize this tool to your environment. So for instance, right off the bat, Python and PowerShell that we're seeing here, we saw that advanced attack where PowerShell was being abused by, attackers. But up front in my environment, I know probably 95, if not more users never need to be leveraging PowerShell. right? As a retailer, this is maybe only something that my IT team needs to use. And, for a lot of the organizations, I think having the same viewpoint where, they're very light users, if these applications are being run on those devices, it's not good news. So with the click of a button, being able to go in there and say, look, I don't even want these running on those devices. And it's a very high level example. It might not be relevant to every team, but I think it does a really good job of showing how within 1 second, we were basically able to lock down our environment tenfold, because you know how you want your organization to actually run and actually behave, right? And so from the other side of things, when we have very programmer heavy or developer heavy, right, architect heavy teams, also knowing that you have those permissions up top and the ability to say, hey, we do have an application that maybe, behaves in a certain way that tends to be seen as malicious. And instead of having to open up big, bypasses or reputations, I can just go ahead and very targetedly say, look, allow it to perform this way for, this group of people. So making sure that not only this fits in the environment like a second skin, but that you're not put in that position when you have, those one size fits all security tools where, maybe I try to put my environment in a higher security posture, but then I end up having false positives that I can't really do anything about, like with the, policies with Carbon Black. And then we're toggling into a lower security posture and inevitably opening ourselves up to security gaps and risks that attackers know how to abuse. So that's why I always like to talk about these policies up front, at least a little bit, because I think it's better that teams know, even if it's not something that they really want to leverage off the bat, it's something that you at least have the option to. So even as your organization grows or changes, or you use different tools in different ways, again, you don't feel like you're dealing with those pain points of false positives or security holes, and that, this is a tool that can continue to grow and change with you guys. So that for me, team, is kind of the high level overview of this, like I said, one Carbon Black Cloud product with that next gen AV built-in behavioral EDR, going through the prevention that we have, that visibility, as well as some of the control features there. So definitely willing to kind of open it up to see if there's any questions that have come through, the past 20 minutes as we were going through this. And, if there's other pieces of the platform that, Samin, you think we should take a look at today, or, maybe save it for another webinar.
Yeah, so we did have a few questions come through. The first was understanding how to install the sensor on some of these endpoints.
Sure. That's a great question. And so we try to keep that as simple as possible as well, where, essentially installation, and it's just a prepackaged MSI file, and that we're, like I said, already prepackaging for you. So for a lot of these teams, if you guys have anything like a GPO or SCCM or deployment tool that you like to use, absolutely compatible with that to be able to get this out to all your devices at once, as well as, the manual based install or command line install that you can also do right from the console here.
Awesome, thank you. And then we just had one more question. I think we can wrap it up a bit early today. Can your next-gen AV and EDR be run in parallel with existing AV, such as like Windows Defender?
Oh yeah, that's a great question as well. And short answer being yes, right? Because of the way this platform was built on that open API or RESTful API system, not only are we able to run alongside other security tools. So for instance, Defender is a popular one, right? Because it's kind of thrown in with a lot of that Microsoft licensing. We can absolutely play nice with them and run alongside, but we'll have also other teams that have basically, I would say have another year left on their AV. They're just not happy. And so we're able to layer on top of that too, completely up to you guys. And kind of going off of that, talking about the open API platform, also think it's worth mentioning that this tool was meant to run alongside and kind of bolster up the other security products that you guys have. So for instance, SIM tools being a very popular one. The more analytics they receive, basically the better they look. And so that unique unfiltered data that we were talking about at the beginning and I showed you is something that, I would absolutely take advantage of sending to that SIM tool. So that way really teams are getting the best communication and, the best bang for their buck it comes down to with all the tools that they're investing in.
Awesome, thank you. And then the final question I think that we ran into was this person is in IT, but not specifically part of the security team in their organization. Is it possible to buy endpoint query and remediation without the other security products that you kind of went through today?
Yes, absolutely. So while we have bundles to kind of, help teams grow into security in the way that, we tend to see happens most often, it's flexible to be able to, whatever you need today is what Carbon Black can provide from, I would say a tool perspective. And then another thing that's really nice, right? That next gen AV EDR that we spent today talking about is still sitting on that single agent. So as teams are getting ready to maybe grow into more audit remediation capabilities or advanced threat hunting capabilities, it's as easy as a flip of the switch on my end. So there's nothing to redeploy. All those capabilities will show up in your Carbon Black console that you've been living with. So it's a very seamless process.
Awesome, thank you. And if anyone has any more questions, please feel free to put it into the question panel at the moment. And not. Thank you guys so much for joining today. I know it was a bit of a shorter demo, but we appreciate your time and coming out. As a reminder, a copy of this demo will be sent out via email, and that should go out in the next couple of days. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out.
Yes, absolutely. And my information will be there as well. So, really looking forward to hopefully following up with some of you and, taking a deeper dive into this if interested. But thank you guys for your time, and thank you, Sameen.
For sure. Have a great rest of y'all's day. Bye.
Bye, everyone.